And I said, well, I'm not going to explain to you exactly why it is possible. When you begin to contemplate the idea of a cross-country drive, particularly a long-distance drive with a particular time goal like a record, there's a ton of variables that you've got to control, manipulate, or at least understand. And that would include things like the police, the navigation, your own physiology, the health of the car, weather, traffic, road conditions, accidents ahead. Anything that you could possibly understand that could stand in the way of your goal, you've got to anticipate and you've got to work with. And one of those huge things is fuel. And the reason fuel is so important is that it really doesn't matter how fast you go. If you're stopped for a very long time, it's going to derail your time and it's going to make it impossible to achieve a great time. So our moving average was 100.3 miles an hour and our overall average was about 98 miles an hour, meaning that 2 mile per hour delta was based on the fuel stops that we had and the driver changes. As I was doing all this research, I had the unbelievable benefit of seeing two people make new claims at this record. And Alex Roy and Dave Maher in the BMW M5 they drove had claimed 6 fuel stops, and Richard Rawlings and Dennis Collins were in a 550 Maranello, and they had claimed 6 or 7 as well. And my goal was to cut that in half. And so that was one of the primary reasons for choosing the Mercedes S or CL platform. So the first 2 cars that I bought to try this out were 2003 S55s. But for other reasons, and I was daily driving the prostitute Gallardo for a while, I ended up selling them. And I bought the CL the same day, in fact, that I had bought the orange 08 LP640 Roadster. And I chose those cars because of the active body control suspension. Now, if you watch one of Tavares's videos or read anything on the internet about these cars, you're going to find that the ABC suspension, the hydraulic suspension in these cars, is the Achilles heel. It's what makes them so expensive to operate, so expensive to maintain, and so difficult to own. And it's a big part of the $9,000 service bill that I had prior to departure on the record run. But they level the suspension out multiple times per second, and you could have 2 adult men stand in the trunk and the car's gonna sit flat. And so I wanted to put enough fuel in to just have 3 stops. So the easy math is 3,000 miles, 4 tanks of gas, gets you to about 750 miles worth of range that I needed. So I needed something around 60 to 65 gallons worth of usable fuel, including the 23-gallon tank that was already in the car. And so what I ended up going with was 2 additional 23-gallon fuel cells that were sort of side by side, and I would fill those with the near side tank, and then I would wrap around the other side and fill the primary tank with the opposite side nozzle, so we'd go as quickly as possible. So that was the plan, and we built it, we tested it, and it did not exactly go off without a hitch. On our way up, we were obviously learning the car. Dave and Dan were sort of learning where everything was at and how all the buttons worked and how all the systems were functioning, and so we decided to test out the fuel system. And so our bench testing was noticing that we were moving about a gallon a minute. And so our thought was to transfer for about 15 minutes to move the car, to move it from just under a quarter tank to just over 3/4 of a tank with, some margin of error. So on the way up, we're going through North or South Carolina, and Dave is actuating the transfer pumps. So we're moving fuel from the auxiliary tanks into the primary tank. And before too long, we have a guy pull up next to us who'd been flashing his lights and honking his horn. So we roll the window down, and we just expect that we've been speeding past him, and he's upset about that. But instead, he motions for us to roll down the windows and says, "You're leaking gas." I said, goodness gracious. And obviously all of our mental images go to this extreme atomic fireball that we're about to be beneath. And so we quickly exit and get out. Dan grabs the fire extinguisher, and we go around to the trunk and we open everything. All of our luggage is packed, jammed against the tank. Everything we've got to wear for the next few days. So we're faced with the prospect of probably fuel-soaked clothing and everything else that we'd ever need. But we open it up. Obviously everything smells like gas. And as it turned out, the transfer rate was about 1.5 gallons every minute. It was working faster in the car. And so we had probably overfilled the primary tank by about 5 gallons. And that had all run, fortunately, not back into the trunk because of the 180-degree turn that we were making just over the gas cap. It ended up dripping down through the quarter panel and out underneath the car, and in fact, all over this Good Samaritan's windshield. And so fortunately, he proceeded along his way and wasn't terribly upset about it. And we learned that we needed to shorten those transfer times. So we ended up doing it for about 8 to 10 minutes each time as we went through. So for each tank, we would make 4 transfers because we had 44 gallons to move in. And the gauges that we had installed were fairly rudimentary and not very reliable, so we never really knew exactly how much was in there, but we had a lot of tally marks and a lot of stopwatches going to make sure that it all worked. And it did work. I think our first stop we made just over 800 miles, so we were well over any threshold of what we would need to be. And the first stop took 9 minutes. So we get out, swipe the credit cards on both sides, put the near side tank in the auxiliary tanks, and the far side pump into the primary tank. And it took us a little time to fuel, enough time to run in, use the restroom, stretch our legs a little bit, avoid blood clots. And so we're back on the road in 9 minutes. The second stop did not go so well. We were near Groom, Texas. And we get out of the car and I swipe my credit card and everything's declined. Swipe another one, declined. Swipe everything. I can't get any credit cards to work. Dave and Dan are exhausted. We've gone 852 miles on this tank of gas. So they're stumbling inside and I yell at them, guys, you gotta get back out here, nothing's working. And in fact, we hadn't brought enough cash to pay for all the fuel. That would have been a good idea. You just overpay for the gas, throw it in, have them turn the pumps on, and then you're out a little bit quicker. A pointer for anyone trying to break 2850. But we go through everybody else's credit cards, finally get some to work, and we get them working. That stop ended up taking us about 12 minutes. And so we get back in the car and I immediately get all these fraud alert text messages and emails to my phone saying that we've seen some suspicious activity on your credit cards. And a few seconds later, my phone rings and I get a phone call. And the call was a little bit odd. It was from American Express and they said, I've said, this is Ed. And they said, well, we've detected some strange activity on your card and we want you to verify it. I said, well, I know what you're talking about. It's absolutely legitimate. And they said, well, our algorithm said that the point in which you used it last and this point were too far apart, and the flight schedules, which we constantly analyze, could not have gotten you from that point A to that point B in time to make the charge. And I said, well, I'm not going to explain to you exactly why it is possible, but trust me that my cards will not be out of my possession for the next 24 hours, and I don't care what I buy. It's not fraudulent. It's mine. So send it on, and please don't interfere with anything for the next little while. So we get back in the car, we're back on the road, and just cruising right along. And in fact, our third stop went much, much better. We were much more exhausted, fortunately, but we ended up getting everything to work, and we didn't completely fill the tank because we didn't need to get all the way into LA. And so that stop only took us 7 minutes. So we had 9, 12, and 7 minutes, 28 minutes total stopped. We had to stop twice to add oil because the car was burning far more oil than we'd anticipated. And we would stop about halfway through each tank and switch drivers on the side of the road and pee. And so we were stopped for a total of 46 minutes, including the time stopped leaving Manhattan. And so that's where the differential comes from. But you can never make up for stop time, and that's why fuel is such a big part of a Cannonball.
If you like that story, it's time to make one of your own. Extreme Experience puts you in the driver's seat of some of the world's best supercars at over 20 racetracks from coast to coast, with no speed limits, no shifting restrictions, and no governors. Head to the link to choose your supercar, find a racetrack near you, and start making a story of your own. Extreme Experience. It's your turn.